Welcome to Microdose Psychedelic Insights, powered by the Conscious Fund. This is the Psychedelic Insider Series, fireside chats with industry leaders in the psychedelic space.
Okay, so I want to thank all of you for coming to the second fireside chat. So last week we spoke with Paul Glavine, who is the CEO of Cybin. Today we have on Payton Nyquvest, who is the CEO of Numinus, and Payton and I are good friends. We've known each other, for almost 2 years now. When you first started to get Numinus up and going, I visited you in Vancouver. Last August? I'm sure we'll spend more time together. So it's cool to have this opportunity to come and do this interview. And you've had a really big day today, yesterday. Do you want to share the news with people and sort of what the last 24 hours have been like for you?
Yeah, so it's been a very, very interesting day for sure. We had our first day trading on the TSX Venture Exchange today, which was a sort of interesting full circle, I guess, moment for me, leaving the capital markets to come and start Numinus, which I never intended on actually taking Numinus public, but just through some decisions we made, we decided to go public. So now to sort of go full circle and it was really incredible to see the reception that we got. We were the most active stock on the TSX Venture Exchange today, which was really cool. And to see the level of interest in the space for really what I've seen is the right reasons. There's lots of parallels to cannabis and new industries and things like that, but all of the overwhelming reception we continue to get is just how exciting this category can be for mental health and healthcare. And so it was just really, really cool to see. And obviously the support is really greatly appreciated. So, yeah.
It's a big day, and it's a tremendous accomplishment. From what I know, there are only other two publicly traded companies in the psychedelic space, MindMed and is it Champignon or yeah, Champignon. So to be the third one, 3 is the number of perfection. I would say that is a great omen for Numinus and where you're headed. And Payton, when we first met, it's been I've really seen this thing evolve through the entirety of it. It's been really great to be along for the journey from when we first spoke. And you had your initial ideas, and you were talking with a number of people in Vancouver about this idea. If you could just walk our listeners through how has Numinus evolved over the last 2 years? What was sort of the initial idea going into this venture and this idea? What inspired you to pursue this initially? And now that you've gone public and you've acquired other companies and you've raised millions of dollars, how has that vision continued to congeal looking forward?
Yeah, I mean, for myself coming to this space, really personally, I turned to psychedelic therapies to try and save my life. And I know people have heard that before, but I come to it first as a person who was just really needing help when I couldn't get any help anywhere else. So I have a lot of firsthand experience with just how much of an impact these treatments and therapies can have for people. And I mean, it was almost like this, snowball just ripping down the hill in terms of I came out of that experience, and all I really was intending on doing in the beginning was just figuring out a way that I could give back and support something that had saved my life. And next thing I knew, having these higher level conversations and realizing that there was just more impact that we could try and help make than just simple philanthropy, and that there was more that we could give. So to see the approach that we took was really, how do we work with groups doing really good research and sort of at the forefront of a lot of the research that is going on, so that we're focusing on patient and client outcomes. That just to see those relationships evolve, and really that's what's really informed our model is doing a lot of research, getting a lot of education, working with those different research groups to work in parallel with them. And there's so much good work that's been done by so many of these groups, whether it's Johns Hopkins or BC Center on Substance Use, MAPS. There's just a huge body of work that's been done by those groups, all not for profit, which is amazing. And so any sort of help that we've been able to provide and hopefully going forward can continue to provide to work in tandem with them, it's just continue to really help, I think, continue to inform us so that we can know how to be best supportive of the space, as well as giving us just a real good blueprint and a real good understanding of what all the pieces we think are needed in order to be really effective. And as you talked about, some of the different acquisitions that we made and stuff like that have really been led by the fact that we pulled in the pieces that we thought were going to be important.
And, what were some of those pieces that were really important? So in other words, talk us a little bit through specifically that acquisition of Salvation Botanicals, why you made that acquisition, and how that sort of led to the next evolution of what Numinus became, outside of just, centers where you were going to put people through potential treatment. It felt like when that happened, it really took another evolution of what Numinus was becoming.
Yeah, totally. So, just to go back to the Salvation Botanicals front, that's, a company that I've been involved with for quite some time, came from a background in the cannabis space, but had gone out and acquired a narcotics dealer's license a couple years ago, and amended it to include a number of different psychedelics, including MDMA, psilocybin, mescaline, different DMT analogs. The big reasoning behind that, as we were seeing, was, yes, we want to support trials and research, but if you can't get access to the material, you could really see a lot of roadblocks and a lot of slowdown in terms of what you're doing. So it made a lot of sense for us to merge with that company. It has existing revenue, so it gives us a revenue platform to be able to build off of, and especially the people. There's some really amazing people that are involved with that company, pharmacists and PhD scientists who have a lot of understanding of methodology and stuff like that. So that was a huge thing for us, and really kick things into high gear a little bit in terms of just accelerating where we were going. So that was the big thing around the Salvation acquisition.
That's cool. I mean, I remember something about how you could start to produce DMT, right? I remember that was sort of the main one that I remembered. Was I saw the acquisition and that you were going to maybe finally have a license to just produce DMT, and this was right when DMT vape pens were starting to come out, and it's a very interesting substance for anyone who has or hasn't done it. So is that going to be what is the Numinus experience like? Right now, obviously, ketamine is medically available. You can use ketamine to treat a range of psychiatric issues. We're looking at least in the United States, MDMA being available at the earliest by 2023, I think are the latest numbers from a recent article that was in Forbes. And psilocybin will probably be, right there too. So when it comes to, basically what I'm asking is when can I go into Numinus and get an injection of DMT, legally?
I know you and I were pretty excited about the possibilities of that. I'll put that on the wish list in terms of when you can come in for that. Yeah, I mean, around the Salvation piece right now, what our license gives us the ability to do is do analytical testing and then buying and selling of those materials. So we're not actually producing anything at the moment. We're working towards potentially being able to do that. But right now, to be able to have the licensing to actually be sort of a distributor and a supplier of different psychedelics, there's lots of groups that are looking at sort of the manufacturing side of things, but to be able to actually distribute them and have the licensing in order to do so is a very large feather in the cap for us, and just helps us, whether it's work with psilocybin, MDMA, it really helps us being able to again, supply for our own trials and work that we want to do, but also be a supplier for other groups that are, struggling to secure supply as well. So in terms of DMT injections, I don't know. We'll have to we'll have to see how it goes. But
is that maybe okay? So is there current research going on with DMT in Canada specifically?
Not with DMT in Canada specifically right now. Not to say that there wouldn't be. And for us, we see the possibilities of potentially being able to do that. Where we've sort of prioritized, as you said, MDMA, psilocybin, definitely sort of the leaders in the pack in terms of what might be coming. But there's a lot of learning that's going on there, even in terms of drug policy change and stuff like that, that open up possibilities for other materials as well. And, if my team, I probably throw enough on the team's plate as it is. If I throw any more on them, they might tell me we need a bigger boat. But it is something that we're interested in for sure. It's more just a question of prioritizing, what we're going to be focusing on and where can we make the most amount of impact in short term versus long term.
Where does the name Numinus come from? What's the inspiration behind that?
I have to give Stacy, actually, the co-founder of Numinus and a partner with me here. I have to give her full credit for the Numinus name. She can explain it better than I can, but we were reminiscing today. About 2 years ago, we had a sort of folded up large piece of paper in the corner of my office that was all these different names, and I kept landing on Luminous or something like that. And she actually, in a psilocybin experience that she had, came back with the name Numinus, which represents and means a place of spiritual divinity. And there's a Marvel character that's associated with it as well. I'll do a terrible job of explaining it. She's the better one to explain it. And she does a good job on our podcast that we did on the Third Wave. So
exactly. I was just going to mention that.
Yeah. I don't want to do her wrong by explaining it in the wrong way. But yeah, that's really the ethos behind it. And we dropped the O because it looked a little more funky and cool to yeah.
Great. Well, so earlier we were talking about, this is the first time you've been in the office in what seems like 3 years. Obviously COVID has changed a lot of things for everyone, and as part of that process, it's probably also changed and shifted some things for you. And I'd love to just hear directly from you over these last 2 months, how have things shifted, if they have at all?
Mm-hmm.
And how has your role continued to evolve as CEO of Numinus?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never been a good work from home guy, and I never really enjoyed it. I have a pregnant wife at home, so she's very happy to be at home and have me around. So that's been nice. And actually, the team, we've really not lost too much step in terms of moving forward. It definitely has made us take a look at how efficiently we've been working and where maybe, even in terms of travel, things like this. It's interesting. I'm used to going to conferences and there'd maybe be a couple hundred people there and stuff like that. Now you do a virtual conference and it's a lot less expensive. You don't have to get on a plane. You don't have to do the hotel thing. And typically there's twice, if not 10 times as many people that are tuning in than would be in a physical conference. So that's been interesting, as well as, one of the things that we've really been looking at is how do we create community in what we're doing? How do we really engage people, in the future, if you're coming to a Numinus center, and you want to continue to have that community engagement even outside of a location, how could you do that? And this has given us, some opportunity to sort of look at that in terms of online tools and stuff like that. So it's definitely given a perspective. The interesting thing around a lot of this is obviously with what we're talking about in terms of psychedelic therapy, that's an in-person experience. It's something where you have to go and work with somebody and do that. I know some groups are doing virtual ketamine therapy and stuff like that, which is interesting. The jury's out for me a little bit on that. I know what some of my therapies look like, and I definitely I wouldn't want a computer screen to be helping me out through some of that stuff. So, but you in times like this, people are in need, and you have to be able to adapt and help people. So, it's been interesting. Also, obviously, with going public as well, we were really wondering, what does this mean in terms of our listing? What does it mean in terms of, investors and stuff like that? As obviously there's a lot of financial hardship going on right now as well. It's actually done the opposite in terms of, we've always known that there's lots of things that need addressing around mental health and stuff like that. But the spotlight, I don't think, has ever been brighter on needs for solutions in that space. And I think that's a lot of what's going on right now. So, for us, it's granted a different kind of opportunity to look at what we're doing, but it sure is nice to be in the office today and socially distance, still see some familiar faces and stuff like that. So
you don't have a mask on though.
I don't have a mask on right now.
Unless it's an invisible mask.
Right. Yeah. No, everybody's gone now. So
exactly, yeah. You're protected. So one of the things you just got it into a little bit was ketamine therapy, right? And the at-home ketamine therapy, and there's obviously a difference between a ketamine lozenge, so to say, and 5-MeO DMT, if you will, right? So these experiences are fundamentally different. The intensity of them is quite, there's a lot of variability within that. When it comes to then the container you create for those very experiences, right? Like, do you want to have the same type of room or place for a single person who's doing ketamine compared to a single person who's doing 5-MeO DMT? You probably need more facilitators for the 5-MeO than you do for ketamine. So I'd love to just hear kind of how you and Numinus have been thinking about this when it comes to scaling psychedelic therapy.
Yeah.
There's a few models. There's the research model that MAPS has developed, which is 2 therapists with every 1 person. Mm-hmm. And that's a very rigorous model. And then you also have the model that we have started to really develop at Synthesis, which, we're doing these psilocybin retreats where it's 12 to 16 people at once taking psilocybin, with usually 3 people for every 1 facilitator, if you will. Yeah. So how have you thought about that range, the different ways that you can facilitate that, whether it's virtual, whether it's in person? What's just sort of your current context?
Yeah, I think, it's an interesting conversation because we don't know what regulation is going to look quite like yet. Is regulation going to look like you need to have 2 therapists who need to have certain professional designations in order to be a provider of this work? So there's still quite a few variables in regards to that we've sort of just continued to move in tandem with the research that's happening to sort of inform the model that we've got. I think, in terms of the setting, obviously, you hear a lot about that. It is extremely, extremely important as well. The integration word comes up a lot, and how do you do that appropriately, and how do you do that focusing on the patient outcome, knowing that, you might have one experience and integrate that for years. It might be something that you work on for quite a long time. So for us, that's really been more focusing on the whole package. Like what is that entire model? What does that sort of life cycle look like for people? And as you said, experiences can vary greatly between, a ketamine lozenge versus a 5-MeO experience, right? And so for us, we haven't really beholden ourselves to one psychedelic. We want to support the space as a whole. We'll continue to sort of make changes and continue to work upon that model as more become available. And so, it's sort of a non-direct answer, but continuing to just be in tandem with what regulation is doing, knowing that, we have to play within those guidelines, and regardless of whether we think that, psilocybin should be done around a campfire in the woods versus, in a clinic model, we have to, make sure that we're staying within the guidelines and using that to inform what we're doing.
Rules are important to follow.
Yeah.
They're equally important to break. So then when it comes to, let's say the next year for Numinus, what's the game plan, right? You went public, the last 24, 48 hours, you've raised significant, initial seed funding. You've acquired a company, right? What's sort of the roadmap over the next year look for you as a company?
Yeah, so the two big things for us for growth going forward, one is continuing to build out our clinic footprint, which looks like a blend of a purpose-built facility in Vancouver that would be able to house clinical practice as well as research. And then looking at other acquisitions in North America, both in Canada and in the US, that not only increase our clinic footprint, but could potentially bring on some additional expertise and industry knowledge in terms of working with some of these things. So that's a very, very big focus for us. And then as soon as COVID sort of allows us, start to be able to work in tandem with some research groups to get some protocol development and get some research underway as well. So those are the two big focuses for us going forward.
Now, when it comes to how the space has developed since you've been in it, right? So when you first started working on Numinus, I remember our first conversation was, I think, August 2018. You maybe had been working on it a little bit before then as well. Again, it's only been 2 years. Over the last 2 years, though, from where the industry was at that point to where it is now, what to you have been the three most critical developments for this to become more normalized, to become more accepted, and for more money to come into the space?
Yeah, I would say the big one is education. There's been a huge amount of education that's gone out, and groups like MAPS have done an amazing job of not only doing a good job of education, but the results have spoken for themselves. So that's been a huge factor, I think, in terms of the building of this category. The research, numbers continue to be extremely, extremely impressive. And I would say the commitment to funding, especially not-for-profit as well, the funding that's come in to really, really expedite some of the work that's going on, that's been a big, big one. I think, I think cannabis, you have to tip your hat to cannabis in terms of showing people what is possible in terms of drug policy change. I don't think that for a long time people even thought that this was something that was a possibility. And it's funny, you talk to a lot of people and they already look at, legalization of MDMA and psilocybin as like a foregone conclusion. When we were originally when I was watching the cannabis industry, the first 5 years were just, is this going to become available or not become available? That was the big question mark. Now cannabis has really paved the way for some of this other work to get done. So I think that's been a big sort of mindset change for people as well. And then obviously just the increased interest, financial interest has been really, really interesting as well. And seeing more groups come to the space to try and support what's going on and continue to, I think, add pieces to the puzzle that are needed in order to really make this a success for people. And when I say success, I mean success in terms of treating some of the things that psychedelic therapy can treat, and making a really large societal impact for people.
Yeah, there's a lot of, things that have been brought up by COVID. There's a lot of mental health challenges that have become magnified. It's becoming very clear that a lot of these systems we've had in place to supposedly help people are, they're failing many people. And when it comes to psychedelics, I think the reason many of us who have some sort of skin in the game in the psychedelic space find it to be so exciting is because we like to solve problems, right? As entrepreneurs, as investors, as people who want to see positive change, like we're problem solvers. And that's what I love so much about psychedelics is they solve the fucking problem, you know, and they don't continue to let us numb it or repress it or, you know, whatever else it might be. And you've talked a little bit about this as well, Payton. You hinted at this towards the beginning of the conversation, but I think just going a little bit deeper into, you know, your own story around this. We went into deep detail on this on our podcast together for Third Wave, and it had a lot to do with you just felt sick, like, and you were like, you couldn't figure out what was going on. Bring us into sort of the pain that you were going through and how psychedelics helped you to sort of, you know, integrate that and work through with that.
Yeah. You know, for myself, I'd struggled with severe chronic health issues since I was a little kid. And at quite a young age, in my late teens, became very dedicated to my mental health. I was working with a therapist, and I was sort of looking at all sort of your easily accessible Western sort of modalities around dealing with mental health. And I was always sort of outspoken about it. Not that I wanted attention, but I always felt, you know, if I talked about it, then maybe a friend of mine who was needing help, he would go and get the help as well, or she would go and get the help as well. But as I continued to really be diligent on doing this work, I just kept getting more and more physically sick, to a couple of years ago where I was in and out of the hospital almost once a week with severe chronic pain, and I couldn't get any answers. I mean, I tried everything, you know, mental health applications, working with private healthcare clinics in Canada. I've done just about. I could probably go to Mars with all of the testing, the physical testing I've done. They'd probably put me on the rocket ship. But just couldn't break through it. And, you know, finally, I was actually in the trauma ward at Lionsgate Hospital in Vancouver. And, I leaned over to my now wife and said, I got to do something different. And, that was the day. And, I grew up in a household that had struggled with, addiction. And so I'd actually never had a psychedelic experience in my life. But knew that I was out of options and had to do something different. And then, you know, sort of pivoting out of that, you know, talking about what you're talking about in terms of sort of entrepreneurship and wanting to get some things done. It was such an empowering thing and I think this is what's so amazing about psychedelics is they empower you to be the steward of your own healing. Yes, you're working with a therapist. Yes, you're working with a guide. But it gives you that empowerment to really do the work for yourself. And it's such an empowering thing. And for me, you know, that it sort of like supercharged my entrepreneurship in terms of like, wow, you know, here's something that can finally marry. You know, when I got into the finance industry as a naive 18-year-old, thinking that was going to be my way to help people. It was fairly naive at the time, but it was just such an eye opener for me in terms of here's an opportunity to marry my entrepreneurship with really my ethos and how I want to show up as in service is for people and to help empower other people so that hopefully, you know, they can see that there's options and hopefully not have to go through what I went through. And you know, my story is not any different than a lot of other people's stories out there. And so, you know, it's the hopes that we can inspire other people to go and do that for themselves as well.
So, I mean, what was that like for you? Was it difficult? Was it scary? Was it fairly smooth? Right? Like I think about my own experiences with psychedelics. I did a lot of LSD, you know, and I even have it tattooed on my ankle. That's how much I used to enjoy it.
Yep.
And LSD is it's a fantastic antidepressant. So the reason I was doing it, and it wasn't like a ton, but when I was 19, 20, 21, probably between 15 and 20 times at higher doses, anywhere from 1 to 3 doses, outdoors with friends, connecting with others. And it was great because I was mostly depressed for most of my, late teens, early 20s. So it was all very, very beautiful. And then one time I did mushrooms and I was like, I thought I died. And, I had a really challenging experience, and that actually put me off mushrooms for a long time. So that's the interesting thing about these substances, is they can both be beautiful, but also really harrowing. Like when it was your own, like, how was that? How did you handle that?
I just have unicorns that come and visit me and tell me that you're okay.
That's it. That's your spirit animal. Payton.
That's my
Your spirit animal's a unicorn. We all know it.
Down, tells me everything's going to be fine, and then I go along my merry way. Yeah, I mean, I've a lot of my experiences have been challenging, but I was really lucky. Some of the first work that I had done, there was a real guidance around, the term "go towards what's hard." So go towards what's difficult, because the other side of that is where sort of the sweet stuff is. And there's lots of conversations about bad trips and stuff like that. And I think, as a lot of people have talked about, I think it's really important. It's less about, is it going to be scary? Is it going to be hard? Is it going to, yes, there's going to be times where potentially that can happen, but if you're doing it in the right context, with the right people, with the right setting, with the right intentions around it, you'll get through it, and you'll be better for it on the other side. So, for my personal experiences, yeah, I've had some pretty harrowing experiences, and I've had other experiences that have been beautiful, and they've all had different sort of different things that they've really helped me experience. But the one thing that is consistent across all of them is when I come out on the other side, I'm much better for it. And even my wife, she's always, especially in the beginning, she was very concerned about me going to do some of this work and stuff like that. And now she says, do you need to go and do another psychedelic, therapy with somebody? So it's cool. It's really, it's amazing the level of impact. You hear a lot of people talk about, a psychedelic therapy experience can be like 10 years worth of therapy in one experience. And for someone who's done over 10 years of mental health therapy, that is the closest thing to the truth in terms of the impact that you can have. Not to say that it's a panacea. I mean, it was really successful for me when I was really marrying it with really, really dedicated practices on both the prep side and the integration side as well. But it really, really helps you make a huge shift, and those practices that you put on either side of it become really, really effective.
Yeah, it's like the container for the experience, right? And the container, it's comprised of 3 things, and I like the number 3. It's the number of perfection, as I mentioned earlier. So 3 things: preparation, the experience, and integration, right? And that's a container. And I was listening to a great podcast this weekend with Tim Ferriss and Sam Harris. So Tim and Sam are homies. I think he's been on the podcast like 4 times or something. And Sam recently did 5 grams of psilocybin mushrooms. For those of you who don't know Sam Harris, he's like a PhD neuroscientist, spent 10 years meditating in the mountains, best-selling author, incredible stuff, has an incredible podcast. He had done quite a few psychedelics in his early 20s, had taken 25 years off. And so they really got into it in this podcast, probably spending, the better part of the podcast discussing psychedelics. It was a really great conversation. And one thing that Sam said in that conversation, which stuck with me, was that, he doesn't think of them so much as good or bad trips. He thinks of them as safe or unsafe trips.
Yeah.
Right. And, another phrase that is often tossed around in the psychedelic space is challenging experience. It's not a bad trip. It's a challenging experience. I do like the safe or unsafe much more. Yeah. Because that really keeps our energy focused on as long as the container is safe, the preparation, the experience, and the integration, then you can go as wild and deep and inwards as you need to uncover whatever it is that is, whatever subconscious or unconscious things are continuing to dictate your behavior or continuing to influence how you act, and the ones that we want to get out, and the shadow elements, all that stuff. So container is critical. And that's why I love, with the emphasis that Numinus has put on psychedelic therapy, on, you're moving with regulations, on, you're really looking at what it's going to take to create that entire container for people, like who you were probably before you did psychedelics, or who maybe your mom is, or I know who my mom is, right? When we look at the evolution of the psychedelic space, it's really about building this new mental health infrastructure to support people, to help them feel connected. So with that being said, sort of a final question before we get into Q&A, where do you see the space going in the next 5 to 10 years? What do you see the evolution of the psychedelic space, the third wave, if you will? How do you see that developing?
The third wave.
Number three.
I think it shifts just how we look at mental health in general, and how we prioritize mental health, right? Like so much of the time, mental health is looked at as like an afterthought, or, even again, using my own experience as an example, it was, oh, I'm really sick, I'm in a lot of pain, I better go to the hospital, I better go to like the last line. And that's very, concerning for people, because it's like, well, what do I do if the hospital can't do anything for me? Then what? I think it changes the way, as I said, I think it changes the way we look at how we treat mental health as a whole. The way we want to be set up is you might come to a Numinus center 10 years from now and maybe never even do a psychedelic, but the way that we look at mental health, the way that we approach it, it might just be that. So I think that's 10 years from now, I think that's really how we see this is, it's interesting. We go to the gym when we want to work on our bodies, we get exercise. The brain needs that work as well. We need to be working on our mental health if we want to be really happy with ourselves and be, the best version of ourselves that we can be. And I think that's what this has the potential to do. Obviously, there's people that really, really need help. They really, really need treatment. And so for us, that's the big focus in sort of the short to medium term, but long term, these are spaces that you could go to for the rest of your life, just to do that work on yourself. And being community that understands that and has gone through that same process as well. The community aspect of it is hugely important.
I love this concept of recharging, right? Like I saw this really, this meme that has just stuck with me on social media. It was someone who is like starting to swim and trying to get like above surface, right? And like get some air. And below it was a shark that was a COVID-19 shark. And then eating that shark was an economic depression shark. And then eating that shark was a climate change shark. Right. And it's essentially saying, like, regardless of COVID-19, we're going to face some serious existential issues as a global society in the next 10 to 15 years. Yeah. And so this concept of having places where people can go to recharge, right? People in leadership positions who are these, stewards of this regenerative economy that we're developing, with psychedelics, with things like, renewables, with whatever else you want, like blockchain, crypto, whatever else. That's why centers like yours are so important, because as this external space gets more apocalyptic, if you will, we will need these beautiful spaces like the new churches, if you will, where we connect with others, we find community, we can go back out and really help to develop something beautiful. So I think what you're doing is fantastic. I really love the approach that you've taken, the language that you've come to this with, the integrity through which you've built the team, and the acquisitions that you're doing. And Payton, I continue to admire your your approach to this, and your story in this, and how you've entered the space and everything about that.
Thank you, man. Yeah, likewise. It's been really amazing to just see the community at large, and to see the work that you guys are doing. I think it's so important. Again, going back to that education piece, to help provide an understanding for people, so that they even understand what's possible. And the energy that you guys have been putting out is just awesome. And even the third wave, it's still the place that I refer people to when they're looking for education. So it's been a pleasure for sure, to sort of walk this path a little bit in tandem with you as well. So I appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. So let's get into some questions. That sound good? So let's start with the first one. Hold on. I like this one. Starting with this one, it's from Britton Rollins. So Payton, if you had to boil it down to a few words, right, to a sentence, so to say, what would you say is the mission of Numinus? In other words, what are you fighting for? What do you support?
What's the bumper sticker? The term we use a lot of the time is we're addressing the universal desire to heal and be well. That really for us is I think sums it up quite well in terms of there's healing as well as wellness as well. We don't have to get to a point where we're so sick that we need some huge intervention. So that's something that we're very interested in as well, and also recognizing that there are people that really do need help and they need it quite quickly. So that I would say sums it up.
Beautiful. This next one comes from Nick. He says, "Hey Payton, thanks for the fireside chat. I was curious how you see the near future of marketing in the psychedelic sector and where Numinus can elevate through branding and a visual vocabulary."
That's a good one. I think the marketing question is a question mark as well in terms of what regulation allows groups to do. I think the cannabis industry, especially in Canada, has fairly stringent guidelines around marketing, and I think I still think the best marketing that you can do is give good patient outcomes and client outcomes for people. I think that's the strongest thing that we can be putting out there. Not to say that we are obviously focusing on the marketing and branding side and making sure that we have the pieces of that puzzle as well. But a big part of it is, I think, just providing public education and an awareness of what this is all about, and helping people in any which way we can in the process as well.
Beautiful. So next one is about buying clinics. Are you looking to buy any clinics in the United States, and will these clinics already have licenses?
Yeah, so we are looking at opportunities both in Canada and in the United States. The nice thing about what we're talking about in terms of medical applications is there's no border restrictions in terms of whether we purchase clinics in Canada or the US. So we are looking at opportunities in both. The ketamine landscape in the US is quite different than in Canada. So there's some interesting opportunities in the US in terms of some of these ketamine clinics that are there and doing some good work, and obviously have expertise in dealing with psychedelics as well. So that is something that we're looking at, both sides of the border.
Good. Next question is from Shaheen, who asks, who do you team up with if you want to be a pragmatic psychedelic and mental health entrepreneur? How have you seen other people approach it? I can give some advice and some insight, but yeah, if you want to get into the space as an entrepreneur, how can you be pragmatic about that?
Again, go back to education, go back to really understanding how you can best support. There's lots of groups doing lots of good work who also still, there's pieces of this that they still need support on. So I think having an education, looking at groups who are doing good research in the space, getting an understanding of the regulatory landscape, I would say those would be the big starts for me. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm neither I'm definitely not a mental health entrepreneur, but from my perspective, there's a problem that needs to be solved. It was education in the psychedelic space. And the approach that I took was I want to learn I'm just fascinated by this. And I wanted to learn as much as I could, similar to you, and what you said, education. And then I think it's a matter of building a great team and having a clear vision. And ideally, if this is going to be your first project as an entrepreneur, one approach that, for example, we've taken with Third Wave is we have a team of about 18 people now. And every single person in our team is what I would consider to be like an intrapreneur, meaning they didn't start the Third Wave. I am the sole founder, but they've all been very entrepreneurial. They're either freelance, or they've ran their own agency, or they run their own website or something like that. So I think there's an ability to first start a small project. And then once you've been successful at a small project, start a slightly bigger project. And then once you've been successful at that, and just sort of work your way up. And of course, if you have a lot of capital, it's a whole different thing in terms of the brand and the team and all that. But if you're more bootstrapping, that would always be my approach, is small bites, one at a time.
Yeah.
Okay, the next one comes from Terry, who asks, how do you prevent, big pharma, so to say, from controlling the pricing of these substances, like owning patents on them? What's that sort of situation with Numinus and Salvation Botanicals and that whole process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the interesting thing, obviously, things like psilocybin, they're naturally occurring substances. There's nothing really to patent around the actual drug itself, and I think that sort of keeps big pharma at bay for a lot of this. And again, going back to the model as well, you're talking about a service-based model versus a sort of prescription-based model in terms of what we're focusing on. And it's just a lot of work, and it's focusing on those clinics and stuff like that, which big pharma has not really had an interest in. I think there's a lot of work being done to avoid sort of that patent process, especially around the drug itself. And you're not talking about huge amounts of quantities of the material itself. So I think there'll be a lot of protective work done around that. But it's something that is obviously at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. And again, I think focusing on that service-based model versus product-based model is really what's going to differentiate a lot of these groups and sort of keeping big pharma out of the space for quite some time.
Yeah, because there's less of a focus then on this is a magic pill, or this pill will fix your problem, or this drug will fix your problem. It's more like, look, this will help, and you got to do a bunch of other shit for it to actually be effective.
Right, exactly.
Next one comes from Greg. What kind of potential do you see for mergers and acquisitions within the psychedelic industry?
It's interesting, and Paul, I'm sure you've seen a lot of this too. There's now no shortage of psychedelic projects that are popping up all of the time. If you asked me that question a year ago, I would have said, I don't know, there's 3 of us. There's not a lot of that going on in the space. Now, obviously, the space has changed quite a lot. Again, for us, more so the focus on the clinic platforms. That's really where we see the opportunity for ourselves. There's a few obviously different groups that are sort of taking a similar sort of approach. So you may see, I could potentially see, some of those groups coming together. But the people ask a lot about the size of the market. How big is this industry? What are you talking about? And I think it's a huge problem and a huge thing that we're trying to make an impact on. And I think, I think we haven't even scratched the surface in terms of the size of the space. So for right now, I think there's lots of room to grow. There's lots of space to continue to get involved. And we'll continue to keep eyes open as it looks interesting. But I think, for me, it's nice to see there's other groups in the space doing work in the space, because it's validating for the category itself, and people, they're providing access for people, which is really, really important.
Yeah, we need more investment in creating this infrastructure, because this infrastructure, that's where I look at, the comparison between cannabis and psychedelics is, I think, more than anything, it's the infrastructure development that's happening through psychedelics that makes it so much more anti-fragile, so much more adaptable, so much more sustainable than the cannabis model, which was, I think, very top heavy and artificial to some degree.
Well, and I think going back, you talk about the pieces of the landscape in psychedelics. It's clinics, it's those types of, it's retreats, it's operating businesses, right? Whereas cannabis was this product-based model. I know in Canada, and these numbers might be a little bit dated, but last I saw, we need about 500,000 square feet to grow enough cannabis for the country of Canada. And I think right now we have 15 million square feet built right now, just legal square footage, let alone whatever is happening in the black market. So we grow like 30, we have the opportunity, we have the space to grow 30 times the amount of cannabis that the country can actually consume. Now, don't hold me exactly to those numbers, but it's, even if we're somewhere close, that's a crazy number. And for cannabis for a long time, the whole investment thesis was, the more square footage you have, the more cannabis you're going to grow, and just everybody smokes cannabis, so it's all just going to fly off of the shelf. And we realized that, the market's maybe not as big as we thought that it was, and there's still some more work to be done there. So I think in terms of investment, I think you're going to see, and we've seen a much more measured approach in terms of, what is the infrastructure you're building? What is the operation look like? How is it sustainable? And I think that's going to be really important. You want to be able to build a scalable, sustainable model, and not one that's just based off of raising tons of money and trying to figure it out after. So, yeah,
the less Ponzi schemes, the better, to some degree.
That'd be good.
I mean, I'm exaggerating, but not really. So we're about 5 minutes to, let's get a couple more questions in here. I like this one from Liam Jeffrey. We talked about this a little bit, Payton, but I think it'll bring us deeper into some of the research. Which psychedelics are at the core of Numinus's focus, and which health problems do you tackle with those psychedelics?
The things that are very interesting to us right now, as I mentioned, MDMA and psilocybin. MAPS has done some amazing work with MDMA for PTSD, and then obviously the psilocybin work for depression. I think there's so many other indications that both of those psychedelics can be really impactful for. So we're really interested in what are some of those other potential indications as well as obviously focusing on PTSD and depression as well. But what are some of those other things that we could be researching to start to broaden the indication scope for some of those psychedelics also?
Let's do one more question, which I think will be a good note to end on. So the question is about the cannabis industry, about mindset changes, right? That cannabis, it's way more mainstream now than it used to be, which makes people, gives people more access to it. So, this person's question is, do you think I'm going to use the language exactly. Do you think promoting psychedelics for recreational use and not only therapeutic use can change the way psychedelics are perceived, thus empowering this continued evolution? What's the risk of talking about it from a non-clinical perspective? Your thoughts?
That's a tricky one.
remember rules are, it's important to follow rules, Payton.
That's right. Yeah.
But they're also meant to be broken.
again, I think it goes back to the safety in which you're using these things and the why in terms of why you're using them. A hammer can be used to build a house, or a hammer can be used to hit yourself in the hand with. So these are they're very, very powerful tools. And I think not that we're promoting the recreational space. I see a lot of work being done on decriminalization movements and stuff like that, and I think those are important pieces to changing the mindset around psychedelics. But I think it's really, really important if you're looking to get an education on what's possible with psychedelics. I think there needs to be, a lot more education on the potential benefits of psychedelics versus, you hear all these stories about, recreational trips in the 60s and stuff like that. I think I myself personally, I feel like it's more of a service to psychedelics to get a full understanding of what the potential of them is versus just getting a recreational experience and saying, well, that was fun or whatever. I think there's so much more that can be unpacked there. So I think it's really, really important, again, to focus on the education of just what's possible with these things, especially when you've got the right container wrapped around it, the right therapeutic context wrapped around it, as well as the integration pieces and prep work pieces on either side.
Well, and that's why I've loved the topic of microdosing so much, because it has a nice way of sort of bridging the gap between, the chaos of psychedelics and the potential risk if they're used outside of a therapeutic container. So, for doing any of these in a very high dose way, I think, as we said, a safe therapeutic container is a necessary must for any first timers or people who have less experience. And microdosing is a more feasible option for people who might not have that ability or might not have the capacity or whatever. And that's just my, personal opinion. So that's how I see it. Anyway, we've reached the top of the hour. I want to honor everyone's time here. First off, thank you to all the participants who have submitted questions and who have been along for this entire conversation. It was, a pleasure to host this. Payton, if people want to find out more about Numinus, the website is numinus.co.
Numinus.ca.
CA. Yes. Okay. I heard CO was way cooler.
Yeah. No. Working on it.
Working on it. So numinus.ca, and Numinus just went public today. So, you can purchase shares on the TSX.
TSX.
Correct. Yep. TSX Ventures. And any last words, Payton? Any final, things to say?
Yeah, no, just really grateful for everybody's time, and it's very, very exciting to me to just see this category continue to get built, and I think it's very cool to see what could potentially be possible for people in a fairly short time frame. So thanks for the time, Paul. Always good to see your
always good to see you.
And hopefully we can see you in person here sooner than later. So
we will. It's great to see you, Payton. We'll talk soon.
Sounds good, man. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks for joining the Psychedelic Insider series, brought to you by Microdose and the Conscious Fund. Visit our website at www.microdose.buzz.